Good morning. Let me get this started. Good morning. Good morning. It's another Friday. So today, we're talking about noise. And you're like, yo, well, it's noise, Sarah. I'm like, yeah, but it's not just noise. It's our relationship with noise, okay? So I chose this topic, honestly, because this is something that I am trying to figure out myself in the sense of like, I just moved to a new apartment and there's noises that are very different and there's some noises that are very obnoxious and how, I label them. And so I really was like, duh, how to align with transformation. This is a significant issue when it comes to mental health because of all of the noises that we are exposed to, all of the, all the things. So I just want to make sure we not wrap up. Sorry, that's the end of the talk. We open up with, okay, yes, hi, I am Sara Wilder. I am a clinical social worker. I'm a therapist. I specialize in addictions. What do I really do? I help people recover. I help people build a lifestyle of recovery, primarily from an addictive lifestyle and coming away from addictive lifestyle, even more specifically with our relationship with food. Okay, hold on, I am freezing. Okay, so if that froze, I don't know, but I specifically, I help people with their relationship with food because mental illness, addiction, they co-occur together. And processed addictions, food addiction is pretty much my story of, practicing what I preach, applying principles of mental health and recovery to help us basically get out of what mental illness looks like, and all the things, right? So really one little disclaimer of what this topic is, just remember that this is mental illness and mental diseases and all that jazz really stem from when our needs are not met. Needs being food, shelter, water, safety, whatever the case may be, some of it being external and systematic, and there's a lot of inequity and injustice in our systems that we're involved in, but a lot of it is also internal. So when I talk about building recovery and a lifestyle of recovery, I'm really helping people realize what their needs are, what their wants are, because a lot of times they're misconceived. And how do I do that? A lot individual sessions. I actually am relaunching my group coaching program specifically around the relationship with food and getting a fresh perspective is what it's called, on how do you take care of not only your physical health, but through the avenue of addressing your mental health. Your brain is the operating system of all the things. So we want to make sure that you have not only the information as accurate as can be, evidence-based, but then also experiential. Like that's something that if your life and your needs do not fit the papers and the statistics and all the things that science proves, we got to figure out what works for you. So that is who I am. That is what I do. So let's dive into what do I mean by noise and mental health. So we're looking really more at the relationship that we each as individuals have with noises. So remember when I said mental illness can develop from an early age because our needs are not met. And that honestly has a lot to do, not only just with noises, but it has a lot to do with our associations of certain noises. So how I want to approach this is really just starting by, I always love a good definition. So the definition, I thought was really interesting. Of course I would, I'm a nerd. But the definition of noise, when I Googled it, right, is a sound that is loud, excuse me, I couldn't read my own handwriting, loud, unpleasant, unexpected, and undesired. So right there, what my ear, and when I say ear is more of like my brain registers, I am trained with bias, okay? So right there, I sort of detect a bias of negativity. It's loud versus soft, and loud doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, so that's not where my bias clicked in. It was the unpleasant, undesired, and unexpected. So that right then and there has more of a negative connotation to it. So therefore, we're now already setting the tone for things that are technically boundary violations. And so when we look at like, what is noise? A lot of the time it is an internal boundary or an external boundary violation if we're receiving the noise from the outside in. Let's pause there, right? That's just a definition. Now, I would beg to differ that we don't all operate on definitions in life. We just don't really, we're at a point of automation in our natural human existence where we don't stop and look at like, how are we defining and operating our lives by what definition? Excuse me, I think I butchered that. How are we operating and what definitions are guiding our lives? So some of that is in our values. So we often miss and don't really check in with what are our definitions? What words are we using and ultimately reinforcing our narrative, which is how we live our lives, right? So that definition was really interesting to me. Now let's open it up a little bit because this is what therapy is all about. Now, this particular recording is not necessarily therapy, but I hope it can be therapeutic if I challenge you to think about what noises are in your environment, what noises are you reacting to. So let's open it up a little bit, right? I start with internal versus external noises. So, and why I break that up, let's start with external, because I think a lot more people, when we think about noise, we gravitate automatically towards external noises. And so a couple of examples, what I mean is, and this is actually from my searching and doing a little bit of preparation for this talk, is what is noise? And it has everything not to do with the sound that can trigger us, but the context in which we receive the noise. So, because it's a word that is also very dependent on how it is that we are receiving and whether or not we are willing to hear a noise or whether it is one of those unexpected or undesired noises in our lives, right? So the context, not only of just that word noise, is already influential to how it is that we increase and stay aware of ourselves and our surroundings. So what I also think about when I think about noise, external noises, not only, we can get specific, I'm going to get specific in a little bit, but you can get specific now. Just think about like, what noises do you actually hear? Could be right now. Now, I don't think y'all can hear this, but I have some frequencies playing in the background. I'll explain those later, but it's, music, talking. Sometimes it's the bugs outside if it's a summer night. Sometimes it's creaking in the house. And then, so consider what noises you have around you and ultimately the thoughts that we get attached to them. And that's where our associations come in. So remember when I said earlier, when our needs are not met, that's when we start building associations around certain stimuli, noise being just one of those very many stimuli that we are exposed to from a very young age that contribute to what mental illness is. Okay, so context is very, and I already just kind of went into what our surroundings are. So when you think about, just what it is in childhood, or even honestly, just in the last plus or minus 1 to 2 hours. Now, don't even go out into the days, but like in 1 to 2 hours of the last part of your life and what you're also anticipating for the next 1 to 2 hours in the future, what kind of noises are you likely going to be exposed to? Because that is very important to consider when you're talking about healing, when you're talking about overcoming and recovery from mental health and addictions. So here's a really big one it tends to be, that's the thing, is that it's very subtle in some ways, but it is so significant in many other ways, and that's tone. So the way that we communicate as humans, we use noises. We have made words that sound differently when other people say it, and it's the number one thing that leads to miscommunication, to be honest with you. Like, there's a lot of different types of miscommunication. I don't mean like specific types of like labels, but into circumstances, maybe is a better word, is that there's a lot of circumstances where miscommunications can happen. But one of the things that I think of that's related specifically to noise is dialect and accents. So I think of just a quick story real quick. So when I was working, this was before I went back to grad school. If you could know my story, I used to work in the prison system. And I was not a clinician. I was actually an officer. So but it was in Eastern North Carolina, and there were so many different groups of people, whether it's racial ethnicity. It was an all-male prison, so yeah, story. We'll talk about that another time. But the dialects of Eastern North Carolina English was mind-blowing when I think about it. It's still like mind-blowing when I think back to like at that point I had been living in the South for 5 years, because I came down right after high school. I graduated high school up north, and so I've been very like susceptible to dialects and accents ever since I was a young kid. And so I have a Southern accent, but most people can tell that I'm not Southern. They just don't know where I'm from because I don't have a very strong Northern accent. But you put me back in New England, I'm like, wicked this, wicked, yo, let's go to Boston. Let's chill. Like, it comes out. And so dialects and accents are, we romanticize them in a lot of ways. But they're noise. They are, and sometimes that noise can become problematic if we aren't able to understand what it is a person is saying. And then what happens is it becomes an internal issue. And I'm going to get to that whole internal side in a moment. So, but just to consider, like, noises are not necessarily bad. However, remember, the definition already has this negative connotation because it suggests that if we are undesired, like if we have a lack of desire to receive a certain noise, or it causes an unexpected issue, then noises can actually become triggers. And this is where they are stimuli. They are part of our sense. So external noises, I think, are very more abundant. And then the only thing, so I wanted to just talk real quick about what external noises, what kind of standard gets set, right? And I want to look at this in more of like a meso sense of more so families, but society, not in the macro sense. There's plenty of noise when it comes to the macro, like political debates, all that right now. That's a lot of noise. Conversation for another time, right? But what is not so noisy anymore for people, but so noisy, is society and what parenting and how you were parented. The history and the generational impact of parenting. One of my first stereotypes and stigmas that came to my mind that with noise is the philosophy that children are supposed to be seen and not heard. And so if this was ever a parenting style, or if it was ever a parenting approach that your belief system, actually it's more probably a belief at this point, that your parents held on you, that is going to transition us more probably into internal noise. Because I can't say it's fundamentally wrong, because there does have to be a balance and respect to, like, no one wants to be that kid or have that kid that is screaming across the public place and making an immense amount of noise, because it becomes an embarrassment for people, right? But a lot of parents I've found and this honestly has a lot of prevalence in different cultures and races and ethnicities, but it doesn't actually have too much of a difference from like white versus black communities, where the kids are not supposed to speak. The kids are not supposed to be loud, okay? And so this right there, that is a seed planted of a belief system about how much noise a person is supposed to make or becomes unaware of. And if we don't necessarily consider that be some degree of an association for individuals, then we're not going to get very far in how mental illness and people recover. So what I do, in session is I go through and I weed through like the immense amount of associations that people have that reinforces their belief system about thinking a certain way and how feelings intervene with that. And so when we look at, I have plenty of clients in my history where it's like, yeah, you just don't say anything, you just don't get hurt. So where does that leave them? It leaves them in their head. Okay, so now we're switching to the other part of noise, and that is the internal. And this is probably more of the world that, like, when people find out that I am a therapist and mental health therapist, they're like, they ask me like, well, what do you do? Like, if I hear a voice, like, if I hear voices, so I'm gonna get to that. Just because you hear voices does not mean that you're schizophrenic. Let's just go ahead and put that there. Actually, let me go ahead and do this now, right? Voices. That's one of the internal noises, and probably one of the questions that a lot of people will not tell me about, but they will dance around the topic because it's probably something that may relate back to what I just said about external noise and standards that have come from parenting, is that they have not been able to express themselves. And that creates a barrier from being able to be able to translate what it is that their internal noises are and not confuse them with external. Okay, so this is where a lot of people misconceive tone because they're so used to the internal voice and the tone in their head because of previous tones or previous standards set within parenting, that is a filter that information comes through. And you can be as empathetic and understanding about mental illness as you want, but you will never know the tone of a person's filter in their head. Right. And I will say, so for like, whenever I was working in inpatient settings, I really did enjoy working more with addictions because they were a little bit better with expressing themselves. Working with people who struggle with psychosis, that evoked fear in me because I never really knew what it is that they were thinking. And they had a very difficult time expressing themselves verbally. And you really couldn't get anywhere in a lot of cases. So that wasn't just by choice. That had already chose the path of substance abuse and addiction before I had actually been exposed to that population of people. But it's because you never know the tone that someone's thoughts go through in their life. Can you learn? Absolutely. But that's a little bit more of a detailed lesson than a Friday How to Align with Transformation talk. So let me keep going, is that like your internal noise. So what do those things look like? Let's look at it from the physical sense now. What noises do you actually hear yourself make physically? So the first one that I went to was blood rushing in my ears. So this was pretty much when I was considering like how I'm going to talk about and, what does this look like in terms of mental health diagnosis. And racing thoughts tend to have an association with the noise of blood rushing in our ears, or that kind of like white noise, or honestly, it's different for everyone. We never really know. Each person could have a individual relationship with what noise that their body makes, right? So that's why I'm asking you guys to consider, what noises do your body make? I know other ones is like my stomach gurgling whenever I'm hungry, or just indigestion in general. I don't know why I have to share this, but I just feel like is that sometimes it's normal for your body to make noise, okay? And where I'm not talking just like passing gas, right? But that is ultimately what it is that your body is holding on and is in consuming things, and it's going to have output at some point. So it could be gas. It could be also like burping, right? Like we have belching. Your body is just trying to get rid of what it is that it can't use. Air. Your body needs oxygen, but air and oxygen, like your body takes oxygen from the air. It puts out carbon dioxide, and that's what it's getting rid of. So those are all noises that if we have an association, and what I mean by association is a judgment, a thought process, or just a memory in general, is that sets the tone using that word, like this is how inner-seated the thinking and the work that I have to do with some people is that you can have multiple triggers with just one sound, because it could have an association to an experience that you don't like. So that is where a lot of your diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder come in. So if you've ever been to war, a balloon popping can be very serious. And it has nothing to do, but it's also has nothing to do with like the person, or that sometimes we can't control what noises we're going to be exposed to. But if you're having those symptoms, it's very important to go and address that, because they're only going to get worse. If we don't address the noise and the not only externally, but the internal noise, then the external noise is just going to keep being overwhelming. So you see this, let me say, I'm going to go to the diagnosis stuff in a second, but let me say internal noises. We got blood rushing, we just got bodily noises, right? Thoughts racing can have a noise that people associate with. Everyone's different. For me, how can I best describe that noise when my mind is just going a million miles a second and likely causing anxiety? It's almost kind of like I hear like a whizzing, like a and essentially what your brain is doing is that it's almost a little bit of a form of dissociation, right? Is that if we're intensely experiencing racing thoughts, intrusive thoughts, you could hear an actual voice if it's your own voice. I tell people, if it's your own voice and you talk to it, you don't have to worry. That's not auditory hallucinations, I promise you. If you're hearing other people's voices or their voice associated with the identity of another person, then you want to go and talk with someone, because there's no normal, but I'll say that there's not much, that's not your normal. If it scares you, don't live with that. If going to talk to someone about it scares you, absolutely understandable. The hope would be, if it's me, maybe you can talk to, I can find someone who I know is trusted in dealing with situations like that, and is not going to make it worse if you don't have the right type of relationship or the right type of clinician to deal with that issue. But that is also a very common thing, like, and people associate like, okay, well, if you have schizophrenia, that you're just constantly hearing noises. That's not necessarily the case. There have a lot of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, and even bipolar disorder in some regard can, and dates back, when I say dates, more of like just connects back for individuals to that external societal parenting concept of like, don't talk, you can't talk back, you can't talk loud, you can't be loud. And I have to really like work to help normalize what their own voice sounds like, what their thoughts sound like, because then people have a very big distrust with themselves to be able to trust enough to just fathom a sentence to say. Actually, so I have a client who I've been working with for a few years, and I'm not gonna lie, it's challenging, because I, as a hearing abled person, don't understand what it's like to hear. So this person has tinnitus, so it's a constant ringing in the ear. Trying to understand that myself when I don't hear it constantly is probably one of the biggest barriers I've had as a clinician to try to work with and to work around, because it is so overstimulating for them to be able to constantly hear this ringing. Now, do I know that there's likely a solution for it? Yes. But we're not even able to get to that solution because they're so isolated socially that anything that causes stress is already on top of the stress that they already have, just because of an internal noise. Okay. So, and I've had permission to talk about this client. Obviously, I'm not going to share their name or anything like that, but just if you have any kind of tinnitus or ringing in your ear, sinus issues is another thing that you have to be careful with, and that can affect your mental health because it's pressure. And guess what? We're talking mental health is mostly the brain. It's all health, but mental health is brain health. So if you've got pressure that in your brain, your mental health is the first thing that's going to be compromised. you have to be very careful about infections and stuff like that, and especially on your face and acne, because that can be absorbed right into the nasal cavity and into your brain and cause infection. You get an infection in your brain, we got bigger problems. Therapy is not going to be for you at that point. Please don't come to therapy if you have a brain infection. If you have a TBI, there's a whole other, realm of, healing and recovery that has to be done. It's all possible, though. That's the thing. And if you want to know more about it, send me a DM, because I've got plenty of resources and evidence-based, research about how recovery is possible. Is it challenging? Yes, especially if you've been living with these issues for long periods of time. It's going to wear down your belief system for any kind of change, for any belief that change is possible. Okay, so we were talking a little bit more about like voices. Those are really common, like internal noises. Now, I gather all this up, and it's like, why is this important, right? Well, this is important is because that's just adding to the stress. Okay. I laugh because it's uncomfortable. I laugh because the degree of stress that we are dealing with these days, and each person based off of, gender, race, socioeconomic status that we're dealing with, that's like your baseline. Any degree of noise on top of that, given that that's what we're talking about here, is going to just be adding to the problem. Okay. So I'm going to put this more into the context of mental health diagnoses, right? That's what I'm an expert in. And however, I'm not an expert in every single night. Like, I stay more on the side of recovery. I can diagnose. I don't talk much about diagnoses these days, because to be honest with you, it really adds more stress to people in some regards. Sometimes it can take away stress, but it also makes it very challenging for the conversation about recovery. But I digress. Let's talk about the diagnosis part. What does this look like? So what I am an expert in, I would say anxiety, depression, attention deficit disorder. Why? I live with them, as well as I have a lot of professional background and experience with treating them. And then also I'm going to probably get into the autism talk, but not too much, because I would say I have not been specifically trained in diagnosing autism spectrum disorders. However, I am very trained and experienced with working with them, because they tend to have the same deficits in needs and exposure to, and that is my specialty. My treatment modality mostly dwells in like exposure therapy. So I would deal with a lot with the social anxiety, because when you're dealing with addiction, though, that's usually the common denominators of what leads to an addiction. So not only do I have to learn how to help people cope, but I also have to kind of, while doing that, I have to kind of fill in the deficits of, they need social exposure. My one client who deals with the tinnitus and that constant internal noise that is related to, like, they're very socially isolated. I taught him to drive. Like, I have had to slowly expose them to life, because they were influenced a lot by generational trauma. They were kept away from social situations because of that generational trauma, and their parents not wanting them to be exposed to more trauma. I get, but at the same time, it's like, it's the catch-22, right? So when we're talking about autism spectrum disorders, I'm going to start there just because I don't have as much to say about them. You're dealing with a lot of deficits. There is a genetic component to a lot of autism spectrum, but if you're in that high functioning category, how I operate is I focus on it being a combination diagnosis of attention deficit disorder, anxiety, and depression. And ultimately, it can justify an autism diagnosis to be high functioning. But what's usually missing are some refinement and social motor skills, social skills, and then motor skills, I combine those two words. And then a lack of education on themselves and what their needs actually are. The social kind of intersects there, and that limits people's sense of advocacy. There is a lot of intersection with trauma, and more little t traumas, in my opinion. There are bigger traumas, like your assaults, your events that have influence and correlate with autism spectrum disorder diagnoses, but a lot of them are little t covert traumas. Growing up in an emotionally neglectful home, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. There's usually a lot of ACEs that are involved or at play within that. And what it tends to look like is that people don't know how to take care of themselves from physical health, because if you're emotionally neglectful, it doesn't mean that you're naturally like, you know, an active, healthy person. Actually, there's a lot of people who are very physically healthy but very emotionally unhealthy. And but you're not really taking into account all aspects of what health is, right? So if you grow up in an environment like that is just subtly in the influence of drugs and alcohol, and I don't mean like raging alcoholics and physical abuse, that can be a certain thing, but just noise. Someone who is emotionally shut in and dealing with their own anxiety can lead to a child having an increased risk of autism, increased risk of obesity, increased risk of all other chronic diseases, autoimmune diseases. It gets complicated very quickly. So I look at like, all right, let's take all that and look at the root causes. People don't know how to eat to live. I was one of them. I have not gotten a autism diagnosis or an assessment. I've considered it. I see a lot of my traits before I made a health change. And then now, I've been diagnosed with adult attention deficit disorder. I don't necessarily, and maybe one day I'll go for an autism evaluation just to see what it's like. But I've taken enough screenings and completing enough screenings as a clinician that, yeah, I see it. I see it in myself, which is why I sit here in front of you guys today and talk about the importance of making sure that you are eating and getting out processed foods in your diet, limiting the amount of sugar to give yourself some perspective of just how much sugar you actually need in your diet. And the importance of movement. And my movement's going to look different than your movement. My body is different, but everybody's different. So let's get into the ones that I do know, because I live with them and I treat them, and I do get success with some of my treatments with my clients. I say some because at the end of the day, I can't do the work for people. I have to work with people who are committed to taking the journey, and I'll be here at every step of the way. And but they have to do the work, and I'll be right there working with them. So I have these cousins of what I call them is attention deficit disorder, anxiety, and depression. Now, we're seeing a rise in the diagnoses of attention deficit disorder. Anxiety, if you didn't know what it was, you knew what it was, we just don't have a diagnosis. To be honest with you, I tell everyone, if you are a human being, you're going to not necessarily qualify for a diagnosis, but you're going to need to consider that you all have a chronic anxiety issue, because we live in America, and you're feeling everyone else's stuff. If you close off to that, then you're going to be unprepared, and it's going to end up hurting you in the long run, health-wise. Depression is not always something that someone knows and deals with. I personally have dealt with it before in my own life, and I go through certain phases with it. I built my lifestyle and my program to really help people realize that you can't control the external things that are going to happen in life. So being prepared for them and understanding your cycles and your patterns will alleviate the severity of depression over time. Will it completely become non-existent to your life? I don't know. Maybe. If you ignore it, it can become non-existent, but it doesn't mean it's non-existent. So, but as you go through the healing process and you learn and you make small changes to the things you put in your body, or the things that you leave in your mind, then you're going to start to see that they all correlate to what depression is. But if the thing is that if you're still living, the risk of you being triggered to a point where your body becomes chemically imbalanced just enough that you could have a depressive episode, minor, moderate, or severe, is likely. So therefore, I do not encourage I don't prepare my clients to never be depressed again. I prepare them to know how to handle depression. So when we're looking at noise and what that seems like in depression, you'd be like, well, it's depression. Well, to be honest with you, it's quite noisy, but it's more of probably an internal noise than it is an external noise. Some things that I've noticed too about like noise when we're dealing with mental health and we have like an episode of mental health is that we stop external noises that actually would be helpful to us. There's a big correlation between people listening to really aggressive music when they're experiencing emotional disarray, or I'm not saying that they'd be depressed, but a lot of that is because they're blocking out the noise internally, the intrusive thoughts, the trying not to attach and to associate with intrusive thinking. You don't have to have a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder just to have intrusive thoughts. We as humans, we have about 70,000 thoughts a day. And if at any point you find one of them either attractive, lucrative, desirable, or just overall an association, a memory, they become important, and we cannot hold on to all those thoughts. So one of the things I do in therapy is I help people flesh out and work on healthy detachments from those thoughts, right? But it's all perceived as noise. So that internal noise that we were talking about earlier, about the blood rushing, about hearing a noise, and then it can trigger anxiety if you like, oh, well, that's a different noise I made, I must have cancer. I want to laugh at that, but unfortunately I have had clients who fundamentally believe that a different noise that they've never heard before is a health anxiety. And I can relate a bit too, because as soon as I get a headache, I'm like, well, got brain cancer, I got a tumor, I need a CT. Give me a CT scan. The association with that, if you know my story, is I lost my father to brain cancer. So considering that you don't just go and get an MRI on your brain, there is a fear there. That is an association. That's an emotion that creates an attachment to an experience that we have to constantly not only be aware of, but to de-escalate, right? Whew. Let's take a breather, because that's a lot of words and that's a lot to do just with one noise, okay? But I'm saying it and breaking it down like this for y'all so you realize that when you're talking with someone who has mental illness, or if you are the person who has mental illness, being mindful of your own threshold for noise is immensely important. It's immensely important. The reason I'm going into this much detail is because this is going to be used as part of my program. So if you're here and you're watching, it's free therapy, free guidance of like, what do you do if you experience these noise? So I don't know if it's still being done as much but mindfulness was being handed out as a prescription. It should piss me off too. Whenever they're like, oh yeah, you should practice mindfulness. When I went to, this was before I made a lot of changes to my lifestyle. But they would be like, yeah, you need to practice mindfulness. You need to go do yoga and da-da-da. I'm like, no, it's just not, it's so invalidating. However, now that I practice mindfulness and that I do teach people a lot of mindfulness, I try to teach them in a way that it works for them and it makes it make sense. And it really comes down to intention, and it also comes down to attachment. And so attachment theory is also one of those things. So it does correlate with attachment styles and all that. But what I mean by attachment is the concept of intentionally looking at your thoughts that you're attaching to and allowing them to go, and you detaching from them. Because if you've done the work, it will work. If you have done the work, it will work to detach versus to avoid, versus to compartmentalize and expect it to go away. But doing that on your own can be pretty tricky. And so I break up mindfulness. This is why therapy takes so damn long, is that we have to break up what mindfulness looks like. Also, like, if we're dealing with all of the noise of like racing thoughts, because people come to therapy way past the threshold of it being easy and it's become problematic in their lives, then we have a lot of work to do to try to break through some of that noise. And actually, I see it as like trying to throw pebbles through a moving bike wheel. It's like I'm just throwing seeds in there and just saying whatever I can. And usually the first couple of sessions, for some more severe presenting symptoms of anxiety, depression, and attention deficit disorder, because my patients have gotten to a point, or my clients have gotten to a point that breaking through that noise, that is just normal. That's normal level of noise for them. And that is, it's really challenging, not only for a clinician, but I can't imagine to live like that. So I mentioned earlier that I just moved into a new apartment. So I'm getting used to, this is what prompted us talking about noise and mental health today. And it's because I'm learning the noises of my neighbors, okay? So my neighbors have dogs, which I'm like dog person. I'm not really, because I have worked on my level of stress and my overall noise, like in my mind, my peace, right, is that external noises are not really, now loud noises, I still get like startled. I'm very sensitive to those, but if you're not, then I'd be a little worried. That I hear the dogs, they start playing, and I'm like, well, I'm not desiring to hear that right now. And I get a little ticked off because I'm like, I'm trying to focus, I'm trying to do this. And it just happened. They start barking. And puppies, they're cute, they're really great. But when I am not intentionally choosing to hear puppy barking, and then also if I don't get to watch them play and watch them be cute, I don't want to hear it. Okay? So that's part of, though, like when I moved into a new apartment, I didn't actually really consider that. I kind of low-key forgot that I was going to have to learn other people's noises. But whenever you move to a new place and you happen to have neighbors, or if you have shared walls, there's going to be noises that are not going to be desirable. You're not choosing to hear those noises. And those are usually where people continue to accumulate stress and can accumulate overstimulation, and what leads to these diagnoses of attention deficit disorder, anxiety, and sometimes autism. But usually that's going to be probably earlier on in development, where you can't change some of that stuff. But you can change how it is that you input external noises. So when we're talking about, like, okay, we have symptoms of people being overstimulated, agitated, irritable, overwhelmed, I have to ask them, like, okay, well, what kind of noises are you exposed to? Can we, and even anxiety, because a lot of people, after they've been stressed for so long, you're anxious because you're continuously processing previous attachments and associations with thoughts, and causing internal noise for yourself. That external noise becomes the trigger. So yeah, imagine like my job sometimes is like trying to fight a lot of like Neos from the Matrix, or no, what are they, Mr. Smiths from the Matrix, with a blindfold, and not being Neo, because it comes to us, at us, from so many different directions. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible to recover. It's not impossible to get some degree of better. Now, recovery has to be of choice for each individual person, and to what investment you are going to put into that. And I don't mean financial investment. I mean more of a time investment. It takes time to come away from the problems that we're experiencing. I tell, like, when I was working primarily with substance abuse and addiction recovery, I'd be working with people who were in their 40s, been drinking for 30 years of their life. Yes, that would make them 10. The youngest person that I ever worked, the person that I worked with who started using drugs from the youngest age, they were 7 years old when they started drinking. I think probably like 5 or 6 when they started smoking marijuana. That's a long time. I was working with them when they were in their 40s or 50s. And they realized, like, oh, yeah, this is, that's a factor. Like, no shame about it. It's going to evoke shame for sure, but you've been using drugs, alcohol, let alone thinking and feeling the same way for 30 plus years. It's going to take some time to start thinking and doing differently. Now that can also be used as an excuse, but it's just an understanding. That's kind of like my motto, is like, not an excuse, just an understanding. So you can choose compassion for someone in that situation, or you can choose compassion for yourself if you are in that situation of trying to change a behavior of consistent behavior to null, is that a word? that's what I was going for, to dull out the voice, the internal noises of the things that you're not paying attention to. And it's going to take time, not only for your brain to heal. Your brain cannot heal. And when I mean heal, I mean like literally start to come back online and activate certain areas of your brain if you are continuously drinking alcohol, if you're continuously using a substance that's going to either speed it up or slow it down. Uppers and downers, we're not going into the whole classification of drugs right now. If you are putting that in your body, even if it is helping your symptoms, your brain is not able to heal in a way where it's going to be able to be consistent with not having or desiring that substance long term. It is an associative thing. As much as we are all humans, the brain is part of us. It's not. But if you were your whole identity of what your brain is, it's just not going to be what you choose. So let's get back to noise and what does it look like. So if you're like, no, I'm not noisy. First of all, ask your friends. Ask your friends or ask your family. And to be honest with you, they're probably telling you about your noise level, or whether it is that you may be a quiet person, but it doesn't mean that you're not noisy. And what you're not paying attention to could be what you have to that will make you better. So for an example, as an attention deficit disorder, when I get in tune with my stress levels, my memory starts to go, my forgetfulness starts to happen again. And my mom starts to call me my nickname of Bam Bam. Okay, as a 6 foot tall woman, used to be a little bit of an insecurity, but now I embrace it. And it's also my indicator of like, oh, I'm not dealing with something. As aware as I've become as an expert in this matter, I am an expert in me, but it's like I lost perspective on myself. And I could take offense to it when she calls me Bam Bam. But I realized, I was like, oh, she's telling me about my noise level. And if I'm essentially matching my own energy from internal to external. Is that if I'm making noise externally, and what I do is I am moving too fast, I am slamming cupboards, and I am dropping things and I'm stomping, and I'm making more noise in my existence that she is just responding to. Because then I'm operating internal and external, but now she is experiencing external to internal noise, right? So this is that transfer point of where a lot of relationships suffer, and is because someone may not be as aware of their noise level because they're in here and they're limited from seeing their impact externally, but other people externally are also trying to have them consider internal. Okay, so that's kind of, there's plenty of things I can say. I really just try to stay under an hour because people have to watch this again. But it is something that if this is you or something that you need to consider when someone's just like, oh man, that's kind of loud. Now, it can be loud to people who are already overstimulated, and you need to be careful, or actually, let me say that. You need to be considerate of whether or not that person is telling you something about yourself or they're telling something about themselves. Because it's very easily, when people are overwhelmed and very anxious people, that they're projecting their anxiety into the environment. So, and they're being triggered by their environment, which is a real experience for them. But when someone tells you about yourself and you're like, well, that doesn't really make sense to me, I'm a little confused, and you don't realize that you can send that message back, but doesn't have to go back to them. You just don't have to take it personally. That you don't have to continue to contribute to the overstimulation, because some people are not as aware of their level of anxiety, and they're going to tell you it's your problem when it's really not. Okay. But I ask you just to be mindful, is that if someone is telling you like, hey, you realize you're stomping a lot, or you realize that you're slamming a lot of things? It's like, oh no, didn't realize it. Is it bothering you? And I say like, yeah, it's a bit loud. They're actually telling you something, like, you don't have to stop and freeze and stop doing what it is that you're doing. It's just slow down. Because a lot of times we're creating noise because we're moving so fast. Noise is technically, I think, speed. It's now this is where I'm not a physicist or anything, but noise is developed by the speed of which energy is received, and it creates sound. So if we're dealing with mental illness and we're dealing with noises as triggers, or we have internal noises that we're like overstimulated by, slowing down is the answer. And that's where mindfulness does come in. It is training. It is, it's not like a one size fits all training. I try to help people make it make sense with their lifestyle, because meditation's just not realistic to just sit there and I would say I meditate through mindfulness and practicing that, but I would not say like I meditate as much as that's a goal of mine, because my brain moves fast and I have to slow down. So when we're talking about the solution, intention is going to be one of my first ones. You have to intentionally choose that it's time to address this mental health issue. It's time to consider looking at like why it is that you're experiencing symptoms, why it is that you're overlooking pain, why it is that you are being triggered by noises, okay? Because it's a very real thing, and there's a very real solutions for it. If you want to fully more understand it, or even work on your own, which you got to be careful about this, is exposure. Expose yourself intentionally to some noises on a low volume, and then work your way up so they don't become as something that triggers you. Just like you go to the gym and lift weights, you don't start with 50-pound dumbbells. You start with 5s. Sometimes there's 2.5s there, depending on what it is, the body type that you want, right? So when we're talking about mental illness, a lot of what I do is exposure. We're working on certain skills and working towards an up in a hierarchy of exposure to be able to understand our relationship with that sound, with that noise. If you want a movie recommendation of where this really helped me appreciate my sense of noise internally, there is a movie called The Sound of Metal. The Sound of Metal was just influential from like a hearing abled perspective, and it also is very influential in recovery for substance use. So it is a trigger warning for anyone who does struggle with still being exposed to substances, and if you are sober. But very supportive movie in terms of just your relationship with noise, but then also just your relationship with recovery. And then, so this is also, so here's really the hopefully a tidbit for you to try. Because if you follow me enough, you know I am sleep. Sleep is where it's at. And if you go to my website, which I have up on the thing, but let me put in the Power Perspective app, my sleep challenge. It is my sleep routine that I do. It is a sleep routine that I give to my clients. It is a challenge. It's going to be a challenge if you do not have a sleep routine at all, which most people already have a sleep routine, but we're just getting more intentional with it. But if you use the sleep challenge, built into that sleep challenge is this one little nugget, which if you don't want the challenge, fine. Google solfeggio frequencies, Solfeggio, solfeggio frequencies. So intentional noise. When we are anxious, when we are depressed, when we are overstimulated, we as humans produce an amount of energy, and we ultimately emit that energy, which is why people can tell we're in a bad mood, which is why people can see on us, because we emit energy, right? Solfeggio frequencies, you hear them all the time in the background of the spa music when you're in a yoga class. If you've never taken a yoga class, you'll see. But if you've ever listened to like Zen music, the sound bowls and sound bathing, as a lot of time people call it, they're different frequencies that match the frequency that we emit during and experiencing certain emotions. And they can help alleviate from the outside in, the inside out. Makes sense? So if you not only listen to these as a coping skill, so whenever I'm focused and trying to study, I have my solfeggio frequencies on that help me stay focused and make sure my anxiety is reduced. When I'm sleeping, I listen to a REM activated frequency to help me really be able to get into quality sleep. I could sleep for 6 hours and still have some quality because I have not only done my sleep routine because I've stretched, I've released that energy and that stress from my muscles. I've done a little bit of journaling and got the thoughts out of my head. So I have a clear landing into activating and initiating sleep so that my body can actually replenish the next day, and naturally my brain is healing while that is happening. So if you are not sleeping or your sleep gets disrupted, that sleep routine that's on my website, that's also in the app that I have linked on the screen below. And if you DM me on Instagram, I can send you the sleep challenge. It's free. It's all information out there, but I can just guarantee you, I swear by this. You do not have to take a supplement. You don't need to take a sleeping medication. It is literally the one thing that will be, it's the starting place that I have for all of my clients is sleep. So that is, if you can listen to those frequencies while you sleep, because if you have to listen to like a show or you listen to music while you sleep, or if you can't listen to music while you sleep, I'm going to challenge you to try to listen to the Salvagio frequencies while you sleep. If you want a recommendation, DM me and I will send you the links to my playlist. And because that is where your body does its healing when you're sleeping. So if you are having sleeping issues, please ask me for help. I don't care if you don't have any money. I won't help you. Okay. Because you can sleep, people can sleep just about anywhere, and we can go into a meditative and a healing state physically, even if there is a lot going on outside. And that's also going to help be reinforced over time and with practice. Okay. I am reaching my own limit of being on this live for an hour. So if you have any questions, well, thank you. Noticed you follow me and I love your content, so I decided to follow you back. Yeah, definitely keep in touch, because I'm not gonna lie to you. I do my best with trying to keep messages, and because I'm not really big on the whole AI. I know it's supposed to help me. I know it's supposed to keep my products and my systems efficient, but I really like to respond to my own messages. And if it's not right away, I'll get back to you, because I do stay pretty much in sessions most of the day, but I am here every Friday if you ever want to try to tune in. For right now, it's still going to stay at 10 o'clock. I might switch it to like lunchtime. We'll see. And if you're out not in America, well, even if you're in America, so I'm on Eastern Standard Time. I'm an East Coast girl, not West Coast. So it is about to be, it's 10:59 in the morning where I am. And yeah, I hope this whole concept of how you think about noise and your relationship with noise, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I can respond with my best kind of guidance or recommendations of things to try. I'm not about trying to buy things. Could you get some noise canceling headphones? Absolutely. I'm sure they're going to be grand. I really want a new pair for the gym, but you don't have to buy anything new to be able to recover. You might, a couple things maybe, but honestly, a lot of it is food, our relationship with food. So if you are interested in participating in a group coaching program that's specifically focused on recovery in our relationship with food, then let me know, because that is starting at the end of February and it's not getting booked out anymore. Like, it is starting. I have booked this out and pushed out the start date for almost a year, and it's time. I am a little bit more settled, and that has been the biggest issue, is that I really wasn't settled in what I needed to do. So it is starting. Tonight here, so probably can't say, but I'll go through your content. Yeah, absolutely. Go through the content. If you have any questions, let me know. But that's all I got for y'all for noise. I'm sure I could probably talk for a lot more time and make a lot more noise. But I've given you plenty to consider. So that's the wrap for How to Align with Transformation. And Friday, February 2nd, it is officially in America Black History Month. I did not want to do a primary Black History recognition talk today, because I'm going to do that over the course of the month. And also just kind of fundamentally is Black History Month is every month in my book, but I realize as a society, it is still February. So I will be doing that probably in the next week or two. I want to do it more as a conversation this year. I want to talk and kind of open up the conversation about Black History Month and the correlation with mental health. Lots we can talk about there, and try not to make it such a rigid and activating conversation, but you can't control everything. I can do my best to like be mindful of people's reactions and tones and beliefs and all that, but it's not gonna stop me from having the conversation though. So, all right, you guys have a great day, and I will see you soon.